Al Jazeera's Rob Reynolds is already there. Rob, President Obama has just arrived. What's on his personal agenda? What is he hoping to achieve?
Well, Stephen, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs spoke to the press en route to Pittsburgh from the UN meetings in New York. He said President Obama is going to concentrate on global financial regulatory reform, trying to prevent the kind of financial crisis that erupted so spectacularly and so disastrously about a year ago. That effort will include greater capitalization of those huge banks that failed, many of them, a year ago because of the bad loans they had made. Obama also wants to deal with what he sees as an imbalance in the global economy, trying to put the global economy on a more sustainable path going forward over the long term. Something interesting with regard to climate change, Stephen, he's going to ask the Indonesian president, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, to make a presentation on how countries can withdraw the support that they give in the form of subsidies for fossil fuels. Many countries subsidize coal, petrol, natural gas, that sort of thing. The United States says that if those subsidies worth about $310 billion were withdrawn, it would cut emissions that contribute to global warming by about 12%. Well, of course, these are the 20 largest economies here gathering symbolically with their heads of state in Pittsburgh. But what about the rest of the world's economies, the rest of the world's people? Well, to talk about that, I'm joined now by our guest, Falu Njie. He's the policy director of the UN Millennium Campaign. Mr. Njie, thank you very much for joining us here in Pittsburgh today.
Thank you.
There's a new report that your organization has put out on how far the developed countries and developing countries in the G20 have fallen short of the promises they made to support the poorest countries. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, thank you. What we are saying is that we do envisage a shortfall in development assistance to the developing countries. Now, this will be as a result of two things. First, because of the financial crisis, the economies of developed countries are shrinking. As a result of that, we do envisage a shortfall of about 15 billion to the targets that we were envisaging for 2015. But in addition to that, what we are seeing is that the developed countries are not honoring their commitments to supporting developing countries in terms of development assistance.
And what's the result of that on the ground in those countries?
Well, the sum total of these two means that we envisage seeing a shortfall of about $33 billion to what was promised for 2010.
So this means unemployment, this means malnutrition, what?
Well, what this means is that therefore the developing countries would not be in a position to achieve the Millennium Development Goals.
Now also, much of the funding that was promised would have been delivered in the form of loans. Is that right? Wouldn't that simply get highly indebted countries such as those in sub-Saharan Africa even further into debt?
Well, yes, because developing countries are actually faced with a multiplicity of problems, and this is one of them. What the G20 had promised to do for the developing countries, we've seen is actually going to put them in more problems, because the resources that are going to be provided to them would actually be provided in the form of loans. Now, this is going to put them into more debt, and then what that means is that countries would prioritize debt repayment over spending on health, education, and other things that will ensure improvements in livelihoods of people.
And the nature of this meeting itself, 20 of the most powerful economies in the world, it's surely more inclusive than the former grouping of the G8. However, it does leave out many countries and many people in the less developed world. Is this a fair way to have a sort of steering committee for the global economy?
Well, not at all, but this is what the United Nations tried to do in June or July when they convened this UN conference on the financial and economic crisis. We gave developing countries, or every country in the world, a platform and an avenue to express their feelings on what the crisis is. And also this is why we are calling for a reform of the international financial institutions, to give developing countries more voice and space for them to be part of the overall discourse.
More voting on the board of the IMF, for example?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we mean by more decision-making power, so that they will be in a position to express whatever they need to.
Mr. Njie, here's you cited a figure of approximately $30 billion shortfall.
Billion.
Here's a figure from the New York State Attorney General, Andrew Cuomo. He says that the 9 largest banks in the United States last year, in 2008, awarded $32.6 billion in bonuses. That sounds like that would cover the shortfall of what was promised to the poorest countries in the world quite handily.
Exactly. The problem is not the lack of resources. The problem is the political will to do something. And it has been proven time and time again that the resources are available. It is a matter of political will to take action.
All right. Well, Falu Njie, thank you very much for joining us and giving us a perspective from the countries which are left out of this G20 meeting in Pittsburgh. Stephen, we will have extensive coverage later on. The leaders are going to have what they call a working dinner at a botanical garden here in Pittsburgh, and tomorrow a full day of meetings on economic and perhaps political matters. For now, back to you.
Many thanks, Rob. That was Rob Reynolds in Pittsburgh, and as Rob says, more from him through the night and tomorrow. A protest